Yeah, so the main use case scenario is to create a very user-friendly drag and drop interface to build and maintain websites so that a non-technical, software focused user, someone that has like a marketing degree, can maintain and operate a large-scale enterprise website with like minimal involvement. So I'm there to build custom components, custom features, any kind of like optimizations or any sort of like improvements that I get under the hood to kind of improve services, so then someone can come in and say, we need a new page, we have a new product, and all they need to know is what that new page should look like and what the product should be, and that's all the experience they'll need, and everything else should just work, and they can deploy that out to multiple languages, multiple different countries. It can do translation, it can do all that sort of things for you automatically, so you can maintain and operate this giant scale site with a smaller core team of individuals. Yeah, so I think some of the strengths really are that kind of ease of use of drag and drop. Once you have a developer come in and really customize the application to like what a client specifications are, after that point, you really can lay back on the development work and really rely almost entirely on what Adobe calls the authors to actually build and maintain these websites. And they really have thought of a lot of those edge cases where things can break, so everything is kind of, I don't want to say idiot-proof because authors are smart, but it's made in a way that you can't really make things too wrong, and that with whatever you're building, it's always up to the brand standards, it's up to the accessibility standards, so whatever they're building is ADA compliant and things like that. So everything that you're doing is still maintaining a proper website, which under the hood, websites are incredibly complicated, involve so many different technologies. So to be able to simplify all of that to a user is incredibly powerful. Yeah, so from my personal experience as a developer, I think Adobe has a lot of work to do with their documentation. Certain things, they're very strong and they're very, they detail things out great. Other things that haven't been updated since like 2018 don't work anymore, and it requires a lot of trial and error to actually figure out what needs to happen. A lot of the time you rely on other AEM developers inside the community forums that basically have to say, hey, these instructions don't work. Has anyone actually gotten this to work? And other people that have done the work and figured out how it actually works have kind of filled in those gaps. So it's great that those exist, but it would be great if those holes never existed in the first place, and Adobe's documentation really just was robust enough and didn't have typos and really got refined more frequently. So from my experience, that's definitely where I think Adobe could really improve the work experience, because it shortens development time. It makes my work a lot easier, which means I can deliver things way faster and things move a lot quicker, because I hate having to say, I'm doing it the way Adobe says I should do it, but it doesn't work still, so I need to figure out what's wrong. That's not a fun thing to have to talk to a client about, because then they get confused and are confused why Adobe isn't working the way it should be. And yeah, it creates kind of some tighter timelines and things. So definitely depends, but I would say like a 7. I think it has good use cases, but I think it's a broad scale application, so if you have a very niche, we're only using it for this one feature, I could see it, then you have to deal with all the rest that comes with it. So there's definitely caveats to it. But I think in the right use cases, it's a great fit for a lot of companies. So a good example actually of is a big business that has multiple sub-brands, like a really large enterprise company that has a lot of sub-brands that are in similar areas. One of the things you can do is you can actually maintain several different websites that all function very differently under the same kind of umbrella, and you can even share functionality between those. So if you have similar functionality and your developers are smart enough to think ahead and see the connections, you can really have a system that you don't need to rebuild every site from scratch. You can start kind of building a core that then you share out between all your brands, and then if you see a bug, you fix it on one and it fixes across all of them and things like that. And I feel like the sites that I've seen that have implemented that like large-scale multi-site management, I think really can leverage that power. The places where I feel like it really struggles is when companies only dip their toes in parts of AEM, as I was kind of talking about earlier, where they only want to leverage like the asset manager, or they only want to manage the analytics tools, or they want to use it for, trying to think of another like more specific use case. like just containing like certain types of like specific like query like content or something. I've seen very niche use cases that then become, you get really wrapped up in all the other features because you're only using like 5% of the tool, and then everything else kind of gets in the way, and there's a lot of like confusion because you're using 90% of this one thing, and then you have to load this entire other really complicated piece of software, and then you say to the user, ignore everything, and then you're only going here, and it just can get kind of messy. And so that's definitely where it becomes a lot less appropriate, in my opinion. I kind of think with it, Adobe really makes it a all or nothing kind of approach, or at least that's the way it feels like, sort of. So that's something I know a little bit less about as a developer. I'm the one kind of dealing with the smaller details, and then I hear about it showing to the client, and I hear good reviews and things like that. So I don't actually know of the actual, like, we've implemented, so some projects are like an upgrade from an older version of AEM to a new version of AEM. I don't know what that upgrade actually turns into a profit margin, but I know a lot of the times those things keep the product like up to date, keep the current technology, because web turnover is so fast. So I imagine the turnover rate is high because AEM is not a cheap product, and a lot of companies, big brands, still use it actively. So I'm assuming that the return on investment is good, but I unfortunately don't know the specifics. Yeah, so I've used some other like website building tools like Google Sites, and I've used Squarespace before. I will say AEM is in almost like an entire another league in terms of like enterprise grade. Those are a lot more for like a smaller business, whereas AEM is like, I'm a big multinational company. So that's to me where that big distinction comes in. Is like if you're just trying to run your local coffee shop or something, you wouldn't need to jump up to something like AEM because it's too much, it's too intense for your workflow. But for these large scale businesses that are looking for something that can really maintain like multinational like sites or multinational employees, and having to work with lots of different teams that have assets and content approval and developers, it really can handle that large scale service really well. So that's where I think that's where I would really like recommend, or where the tools come really in handy. I'm going to give it a 6, which is I think a little harsh, but I'm saying that because I think Adobe can really improve it. There are a few places where you can see Adobe has this great design philosophy for how it should all work together, and then there are these like kinks and hiccups that really get really confusing and can disorient people. And especially with working our QA team, for example, sometimes they get so turned around by features that as a developer I'm so used to them, but to a fresh set of eyes it can be really unintuitive. So I think Adobe has some really good design principles, but I feel like they're almost there. There's definitely a lot of times you need to be hand-holdy and be like, this is confusing, or this feature doesn't really work the way you'd expect, and I wish there was less of that. So yeah. Yeah, I might ask you to repeat some of the sub-questions, but definitely the editor, like the main UI for like configuring the pages and the sites in AEM sites, I think is very powerful. I think the design of it is pretty smart. I think it's pretty user-friendly and has a lot of feature-rich tools that are designed in a way that make a lot of sense once you kind of get the feel of it. So I really think that's definitely a strong core. Yeah, the DAM as well, the digital asset management, is also incredibly powerful and can really handle a lot of complex business use cases. So I've seen really impressive things done with the DAM in the past, so I definitely see that they put a lot of work into that. And then one other smaller feature as a developer is HTL, their hypertext templating language, which is basically how you configure the front end of components. It's a small feature set, but it serves a very specific use case for talking to your back-end services, but it's actually incredibly convenient and very user-friendly. And when I picked up on it and how to use it, I was very impressed with how little effort it took to build these front-end applications. So I actually think that that's another like gold star feature that AEM has under the hood that I don't think gets enough recognition. I believe so. Again, it's similar to that other question, so I don't know exactly the specific details and the return on investment, but I see a lot of companies using it, so I assume that, yeah, they're happy with the way it costs. I would say yes. If anything, it can sometimes be a little overwhelming. Sometimes there's a lot to pick from, but yeah, I would say for the most part, Adobe really has covered most use cases for most businesses and thought about how to address those, and then the rest is customization for me to figure out. I think especially yes with that, because it links so easily with things like Marketo and other analytics tools. You can really see like the direct influence between like the decisions you're making on the way you're building the site versus the analytics that you're returning. I've worked less with that. I've only been a part of conversations with that, but I believe that that actually, yeah, has been done, like, or at least delivers in the way that a lot of companies expect as they continue to use these tools and support them. No, again with the docs, there can be definitely hiccups. We actually even had on our recent project, we were focusing on a design with a front-end service called Angular. Adobe's documentation on Angular was almost so bad that we realized that we should probably just switch. So we had to rebuild a lot of our components into React, which is Adobe's definitely more preferred language. But they presented that as if they were both equal slices of the pie, but really they were very much wanting you to pick one. But they didn't really make that super obvious, so we kind of got into a bit of a corner and then had to kind of backtrack a little bit. So that's, again, that kind of documentation hiccups, things where there's that corners and kinks to it. I personally haven't purchased it because I develop in it, but I will gladly keep working in it. That to me feels like a bit more of an accurate question for me. Yeah, because there's a lot of companies that really leverage it, and they've been using it forever, and they just need a small thing, or they something is broken that it got out of date because they haven't looked at it in 5+ years, or they need to upgrade to the newest thing. And I really like working on that consulting side with the the actual people that work with this software. It's like I'm actually working with them directly, and I like being able to build a feature that simplifies something that took them a day to do in a button click. That feels great. So that's the kind of stuff that I really enjoy. So yes, I do like it.